Clashes have broken out in central Paris between French security forces and those taking part in this week's Gilets Jaunes protests. Shops have been looted and more than 60 people arrested. The anti-elite Gilets Jaunes movement has been protesting every Saturday for the past 4 months against the government's economic policies, as well as wider issues such as globalization. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson has more.
Central Paris came under attack today, just as it did in the early weeks of this protest. Police used tear gas and water cannon to push back protesters, among whom the Interior Minister said were 1,500 professional thugs. Security forces called on peaceful demonstrators to leave the capital as kiosks were set alight and shops along the Champs-Élysées, symbols of France's wealth, were smashed. The world-famous restaurant Fouquet's was left ransacked. As the protests spread to nearby streets, 60 firefighters were called to tackle a blaze at a bank. A mother and her child were rescued from the apartment above. Despite overtures by President Macron and the transformation of some protest leaders into electoral candidates, some of this movement's original anger remains.
As a Gilets Jaunes, I'm not calling on Emmanuel Macron to resign, not at all. That's not the case for everyone, but it is for me. I'd like him to put in place a Sixth Republic with more fiscal justice, more social justice. It seems he's arrogant. He doesn't like people. He despises them.
France is a rich country, and that wealth should be shared with those who have less and less. Unfortunately, it's a political decision. We won't stop saying that. And unfortunately, the politicians who are now in power are making our situation worse and aren't working for us.
This was seen by some Gilets Jaunes as a crucial day in their 4-month protest, marking the end of a national debate launched by the government to address their concerns. Protest leaders have called this show of force an ultimatum, but there are those who hope it marks the last eruption of a movement whose momentum is fading. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Live pictures here from Paris along the Champs-Élysées. You can see the flames there in the center of your screen. Now, the 18th week of the Yellow Vest protest. Now, initially, this was over a pending fuel tax, which was eventually suspended by the government, but it's now branched off into greater concerns of French financial challenges there.
But take a look at what's going on. We are hearing that fire you see has been set. There are windows shattered along restaurants and shops along the Champs-Élysées, and there is looting going on there as well. This is the 18th week, as we said, that the Yellow Vest protest is in force, and they had seemed, we understand, to dwindle a little bit. There you might hear, we're assuming that may be some tear gas because the police are responding with tear gas. But this morning, it's really been amplified yet again. You can see all of the people standing there. We're going to keep our eye on this for you, and we'll let you know how it continues throughout the morning.
All right, investigators at the Ethiopian...
So we want to show you what's happening in Paris right now. Some violent protests there right between anti-government demonstrators, who are also known as Yellow Vests, and police. But look at this, is a mess. This is the 18th consecutive weekend of protests in Paris and other major French cities, we should point out. But the Yellow Vests are protesting President Emmanuel Macron's policies.
CNN correspondent Oren Lieberman is there in Paris, and he is on the phone with us. Oren, tell us what's happening here.
Well, we've seen these develop from this morning when it was just a few Yellow Vest protesters gathering along the Champs-Élysées to what we're looking at now. And it is quite stunning, the images we're seeing from one of the most famous thoroughfares in Paris and probably the world in terms of Yellow Vest protesters and what's going on. We've seen smashed windows, we've seen torched cars along the Champs-Élysées, as well as smashed storefronts right along this such a famous alley here. In response, we've seen police firing not only water cannons but also tear gas to try to get these protesters to disperse. I'll point out one of the most famous storefronts or restaurants that was smashed here, and that is Fouquet. That's known for where, in 2007, President Nicolas Sarkozy held his election night victory, and that is a function of what these Yellow Vest protesters are so angry about. To them, this restaurant, Fouquet, and to them, President Sarkozy symbolized the wealth and the inequality that they've been protesting about since mid-November, and that perhaps is one of the reasons why that specific restaurant was targeted in what has become these violent protests along the Champs-Élysées. One of the key questions here is, why now? Why such a violent protest on this day? Because these protests have been going on since mid-November, and although certainly they started large, they had since tapered down quite a bit. They were quite a bit smaller than they had been right at the beginning. And that answer may be in what was called President Emmanuel Macron's Great Debate. After these started, President Macron visited all of the regions in France and tried to engage the protesters and average citizens on what they were upset about, on the economic inequalities that had angered them. The Great Debate, as it was called, ended yesterday, but part of the frustration on the side of these Yellow Vest protesters was that there were no propositions put forward from the Great Debate. There was no idea on how to close economic inequality, and that may have led to what we're seeing as the anger and the outpouring of the anger on the Champs-Élysées as we're watching right now. Of course, mixed into these Yellow Vest protesters may be extremists and anarchists that are fueling the violence that we're seeing on the street, as well as the police response to that. So far, we've learned from police that at least 44 have been detained, but if the protest continues as it has been this morning, that number may well rise.
Yeah, we're seeing more of the water cannons, rocks being thrown, the fires there. Oren Lieberman reporting from Paris for us. Oren, thanks so much.